I worked at a Jimmy John's restaurant for a couple of years when I was at college. It was a nice place to work, plus I had a car, so I easily got hired as a delivery driver. There's something about doing the majority of the work in your car that makes the job so much more enjoyable. Plus, I could take my study notes and play them in the car while I drove around. Early on during my sophomore year of college, I began delivering to a man who lived in Verona. He was right on the edge of our delivery area and was a nice older man, likely in his early 70s. The first time I delivered to him, he seemed quite taken with me. I could tell. After that first delivery, he began to ask on the phone whenever he placed an order, specifically for me. I know that most people might think this was creepy right away, but honestly, it didn't really come across that way. He was a very nice older man, seemingly. Never came on to me, didn't even give me the once-over when I was over there. He always gave me a very healthy tip as well. As a Jimmy John's driver, that could be a rare experience. It really didn't matter to me if he liked me or whatever. He was never creepy or weird about it, so it was just fine. At least once a week, he would call in an order, and each time he would ask, "Is Jen working today?" With that, I would go and deliver his sandwich to him. During finals week that year, I decided to go ahead and work anyway. I didn't need to take time off to study because I could always just study in my car anyway. One afternoon, around 2 hours into work, the snow started falling very steadily, and it began to accumulate quickly. We didn't get a whole lot of orders that day because of this, so ironically, I wasn't really getting that much studying done. I did have my books out in the car, so I went to go out and grab them, and got to work as well. At about 9 p.m., the phone rang. I answered it, and before I was even able to give my name, I heard the familiar voice of that old man asking me, "Is Jen working today?" He placed his regular order, and I hopped in my car to drive over to his place. I had to go rather slowly because the snow was so slippery this night. I was born and raised in Wisconsin, so I was used to driving in the snow, but this particular snow was a bit sloppy. I found myself skidding quite a bit. It was piling up fast on my windshield, so I had to keep my wipers on full blast just to remove it. It was very difficult to see where I was going. Fortunately, Jimmy John's only delivers really close to their stores, so I arrived at his house pretty quickly. I parked on the street right behind another car, which appeared to be warming up. I thought that was odd because with the snowstorm in full gear, I didn't think anybody should be out driving tonight unless they really had to. Home was the perfect place to be. I grabbed the old man's order and hopped out of the car. Looking at the house though, I noticed he had all of his lights off this time, which was rather unusual. I went up and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again. This time, I heard a voice from inside the house shout out at me, "Come in!" This was different than every other time I delivered there. The man had always come right to the door. He'd never asked me to come inside either. This was really odd. I really didn't want to go into a customer's house, so I knocked on the door again. Again, I heard him yell at me to come in. After considering it for a moment, I finally decided to go inside. The man had always been nice to me before, and I had no reason to expect this time would be any different. I found it pretty unlikely he would have been the type of creep that would spend months trying to gain my trust, just to invite me into his house one random evening and do something to me. That seemed kind of silly to me. I opened the door and walked in. The house was dimly lit by a lamp in the corner. I was in the front hallway. I looked around and peeked into the living room, where I saw the man rocking in his chair right by the fireplace. There was a very small fire going. I couldn't really see much else, other than the man's silhouette. I was really unnerved at this image. I felt like I should just turn around, go back outside, get in my car, and leave. It was then that something caught my eye. On the floor, right next to his chair, I saw a knife laying on the carpet. That was the clincher that convinced me to leave. Just as I decided to do so, I heard the man call out softly, "Jen, don't go." In my head, I was telling myself, screw that, this is way too weird. I had been moving slowly, but I noticed the man was making no attempt to get up and follow me. I turned and rushed toward the door. Just as I was about to reach it, though, I saw through the glass something moving off the side of the door on the porch. My heart jumped in my chest. I realized that somebody was standing just out of view of the door, pressed up against the house. I realized right then why the man hadn't gotten up to follow me. He had an accomplice outside who was going to grab me as soon as I left. It seemed like an eternity passed as I stood there, wondering what to do in this situation. I now had to creep both inside and outside the house. Regardless of what I did, it seemed I would be subject to one of them. The man outside moved. I knew he'd noticed that I was not acting. As he moved toward the door, I quickly reached out and grabbed it. I locked it tight. The man stared at me through the window. He was wearing a black ski mask over his face, but I could see the anger in his eyes. He began to pound on the door, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I took out my cell phone and dialed 911. I showed him the screen as I hit the call button. He got the hint and turned and left. He jumped into the car I'd seen warming up and drove off. It turned out the old man hadn't been trying to hurt me at all. In the time period of about 30 minutes that it had taken since he'd placed his order and the time I got there, someone had broken into his house, beat him up, and tied him to his rocking chair. The intruder was right in the middle of robbing him and had been loading things into his car when he saw me pull up to the house. Apparently, he was going to do something to me on my way back out. Well, even though nobody was hurt in the end and the old man gave me a pretty good tip for helping him, I just couldn't take the stress of that job anymore. I quit after and got a job waiting tables. Much happier experience. This is the weirdest thing that ever happened to me in my entire life. I can't actually explain how it happened either, but I can guarantee it did happen. During a snowstorm one winter, I was hanging out with my then girlfriend. We were having a wonderful evening all in all, and we decided we should watch a movie and order a pizza. I hated the idea of making a pizza delivery guy deliver a pizza in the middle of a snowstorm. My girlfriend, though, insisted they often got very busy when it snowed out, so I broke down and let her order a pizza. We then settled in and I tried to decide what movie to watch. Nearly 45 minutes after we placed the order, my girlfriend began to get very impatient. I tried to tell her that with the driving conditions so poor, combined with that increased business she had told me about, she had to give the poor guy a little bit of leeway as to when he would arrive. She was having none of this, though, and kept on saying bad things about the pizza place. Finally, about an hour after I'd placed the order, I noticed the lights of a car pulling up alongside the house. Outside, I heard someone come up on the porch and begin to knock on the door. I went to the door, opened it, and of course, there was the pizza delivery. He gave me the pizza, which I had already paid for, and I gave him a tip. This was despite the fact my girlfriend insisted he didn't deserve one since he'd taken so long to get there. She did this right in front of him, mind you. I apologized for her behavior and sent him on his way. I put the pizza box down on the kitchen counter and proceeded to get into a fight with my girlfriend about being so rude and nosy. I placed the pizza box on the kitchen counter and then proceeded to get into a big fight with my girlfriend about being so damn rude. I'd never seen her act that way about something before, but it seemed she had a bug up her ass about pizza delivery guys for whatever reason. I warned her that she had to be careful, or one day when she ordered something she would end up with a spit in her food, if she was lucky. If she was unlucky, it could be something worse. As the two of us stood there arguing, suddenly I heard another knock at the door. Confused as to who could possibly be coming over to the house during the snowstorm, the two of us went to answer it together. Upon opening it, there was the pizza delivery guy standing right there. He apologized for the long wait to get to us. We were surprised. We told him that our pizza had already just been delivered. He was insisting that was impossible because he was the only driver working that night. He told us that's why it had taken him so long to get there. I didn't know what to do. I had already paid for the thing online, so it didn't seem like a scheme to try and screw us over or anything. The driver seemed genuinely confused and upset as well. My girlfriend began verbally assaulting him. I couldn't understand why she was acting this way. After a moment, I became fed up with it and just took the second pizza anyway. I gave that driver a tip as well and he left. We walked back into the kitchen, with my girlfriend nagging me about how she had been right about them all along. She told me I shouldn't have tipped that second guy because clearly he was just conning me. It just didn't make sense. I was getting really fed up with how she was acting. I decided it would be best to just have our pizza and watch the movie. I got myself a plate and proceeded to open both boxes. When I opened the box delivered by the first driver though, my girlfriend began to scream. I looked inside. There was what looked like the torn up bodies of animals scattered all over the pizza. On the back of the box in red was written, "Next time," my girlfriend's name. And I didn't know what it meant and I never found out, as we broke up shortly afterward. Considering the way my girlfriend was acting towards the pizza delivery guys, maybe she'd pissed off somebody pretty badly in the past. Weird thing is, I have no idea how the first guy even knew we'd ordered a pizza. Whatever it was and whatever conflict my girlfriend had with the pizza delivery people, I'm glad I never had to experience anything more. I'm the son of two first-generation immigrants from China. My parents came over during the 1960s after the immigration quota was raised for the 1965 Immigration Act. They settled down in Chicago, and I was their first child born in the United States. I grew up in the 70s and early to mid-80s. My parents opened up a restaurant in the 70s that I still own today. Although I currently enjoy a lot of success, that was not always the case. In fact, in the early days, the restaurant didn't make much money at all. To keep from hiring too much outside help and increasing costs, all the family had to pitch in to help. I'm sure you've seen this happen at some smaller Chinese restaurants. I would come to the store after school and sit in the booth by the cash register and do my homework while helping. If the phone rang, I would be the one taking the orders. When the customers came to pick up their food, I would hand them the food and take their money. I didn't get paid for this work, but it was really minimal effort, and it didn't really interrupt my studying very much either. When I was 16 years old, enough to legally drive and work, my parents hired me as a delivery driver. I was happy to finally be making some money. Basically, I only worked for tips, but it was a decent amount of money all the same. More often than not after that, my younger sisters and brothers took over the hosting duties. This happened to me back in the mid-1980s. I just finished up at school and was headed in to work. We expected a pickup and delivery business that day because there was supposed to be a snowstorm that evening. My parents, as I'm sure you can imagine, were not the sort who would cancel delivery just because of the weather. The flurries had begun to fall before I'd even left school, and by the time I was at work, it was falling quite heavily. It seemed at first that my parents were wrong about the extra business tonight. For the first couple of hours, we didn't even get a single customer. It was after 5 p.m., and the snow was piling up significantly. Then I heard a customer come into the store. My younger brother was supposed to greet him, but I decided to do it since we were so slow. The man who walked in immediately made me uncomfortable. I didn't really know why. He didn't look threatening, but he was acting very weird. He was squinting hard, and we had a big aquarium, which he walked over to and began to speak to the fish. Then he walked up to the counter. After looking at the menu for a moment, he actually said this to me. "Hey, yeah, so what do you recommend, Fu Manchu?" I groaned but tried not to show my annoyance. This sort of behavior wasn't totally unheard of, and my parents usually tolerated idiots in order to make more money. I suggested he order the beef and broccoli, and when I did, rather than order, he looked at the menu for quite a while. When I was about to say something, he looked away from the menu and looked down at me. He met my gaze head on, and the wild look in his eyes sent a shiver down my spine. Can I help you with something, sir?" I finally asked, a little bit of annoyance in my voice. He didn't answer me, and even though I hadn't meant to, I began to drum my fingers on the counter in impatience. After a long pause, he asked me, "Do you know karate?" In fact, I did not. This was not an uncommon stereotype back then, but I didn't answer. The man began making fake karate noises at me. I just stared at him in disbelief. "So, you know karate? Tough guy? You want to settle this outside?" "Settle what?" I said to him. "I haven't even done anything to you." The man was getting quite boisterous with his karate noises. His loud voice attracted the attention of my mother. She came out and saw the man giving me a hard time. When she assessed the situation, she demanded that he leave. The guy stopped and pulled a pocket knife out of his coat and began to wave it at my mother and I. He told my mother to make him leave. When he started to make a ruckus again, my dad and two of the men from the kitchen came out, each with their own much bigger knives. The chef demanded the man leave, and he did after giving me a long, dirty look. As the evening deepened, the snowstorm began to bring in the regular influx of customers. I had to let my brother and sister take orders because I was getting tons of delivery requests. It was quite rough. The snow was falling very heavily, and I had to drive real slowly. I had to pile several orders into the car at a time and drive to each building at a snail's crawl. I had 3 orders to get out around 10 p.m. Fortunately, 2 of them were in the same apartment building, so after delivering the first, the second and third should be easy. I got out of my car, the snow hitting me in the eyes, and I went up to the buzzer. I was immediately buzzed into the gate and walked up to the building. The first hallway was long and empty. I knocked on the door at its end, delivered the order, and then got into the elevator to go to the top floor. Arriving at the next apartment, I knocked on the door. It won't come as a surprise to anybody hearing this that the man who answered was that racist man from the restaurant earlier. As he opened the door, I felt like a ball of lead had formed in my stomach. I tried to keep my composure and hand the man his food. The creep wouldn't give me money though, and he didn't try to take his food either. He just smiled at me. After a long pause, he asked me once again, "Do you know karate?" My heart was beating fast. I wanted to turn around and run off. I didn't answer and tried to hand the food over to the man. He wouldn't take it though. Finally, I shook my head no. I guess in retrospect, I should have said yes. He was obviously asking me because he wanted to know how easily he could beat my ass. Although I was expecting a beating almost right away, he held his hand out for his food. I handed it to him. He held it for a moment before throwing it on the floor and stomping all over it. I made to run off, but the man grabbed me and shoved me backwards, my back hitting the wall across the hallway. I hit my head too and felt fuzzy for a moment. The man walked out into the hallway with me. I wanted to get up and leave, but the wind had been knocked out of me. I didn't know what to do. This guy looked like he was gonna kill me. Not much time had passed between the time I'd fallen against the wall before the man was standing over me. He was about to kick me in the face when someone in the apartment behind the wall opened their door. A man in his early 20s looked out and noticed me laying there. The other man immediately fled back into his apartment and slammed and locked the door. The new guy helped me up and offered to call the hospital for me because it seemed I'd damaged my head. I declined, but I did ask him to walk me out of the building. I didn't tell my parents what happened. They were pretty overprotective, so I knew if I did, they wouldn't let me deliver anymore, and I really liked that job. Fortunately, I never had to interact with that man ever again. Let me start by adding a little info for context. I'm 29 years old, but often get mistaken for being much younger than I am. I look so young, sometimes people mistake me for being 13 to 15 years old. I have a real baby face, and I'm petite as well. I try to use this to my advantage if I don't want to talk to someone. So yesterday, on Saturday, I went to the mall to pick up a new dress since my cousin is getting married next month. I wasn't picking up anything too fancy, since the wedding wasn't super big or traditional. Still though, I thought I should try to look nice. As I picked my last of 5 options and made my way to the dressing room, I was approached by a woman who asked how old I was. I told her not to worry about it and went to try my things on. I picked out what I liked and exited the dressing room. When I returned the unwanted dresses to an employee, I was again approached by the same woman who decided it was her business to ask how old I was. Again, I told her to leave me alone and tried to find some good shoes to match my dress. In the shoe section, I was approached yet again by this woman, who all of a sudden decided I was a child. She started yelling at me about how 12-year-olds shouldn't be left in the mall alone and asking me where my mother was. I kindly let her know I was an adult and that I was fine. This seemingly upset her. I guess she reported me to a security guard as a lost child. When approached by security, I answered all his questions and even showed my ID to prove I was an adult. I let him know she'd been bothering me. As far as I know, he told her how old I was and to leave me alone. The rest of the day though, wherever I went in the mall, this woman followed me the entire way. Finally, I got annoyed enough to just leave, where this woman followed me out to my car and proceeded to try and shove me into her car, telling me she would drive me home. I let her know once again that I was an adult. I had my own car and was going to drive myself home. I got into my car and drove around for a good hour to make sure she still didn't follow me, before finally going home.